Insurance agents from around the world, welcome to the Insurance Guys podcast. My name is Scott Howell, your fearless host and leader, insurance agency owner and insurance evangelist for I Protect Insurance and Financial Services, based out of Huntsville, Alabama. And before we get started on today's episode, please help me welcome. He is a 6'3" sophomore from Mobile, Alabama, parade first team All-American, Rivals 5-star recruit. He is a fantastic insurance agent and a great American. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome the incomparable Mr. Bradley Flowers. How are you, Bradley?
Fantastic. What about you?
Best I've ever been. Bradley, got a quick story to tell, and then we've got an all-star guest to come on this show today that I am beyond excited to have on this program. But before we do, Bradley, I got a quick story to tell. So for those of you that haven't heard, I thought that my neighbor who lives as you walk out the front door of my house, 50 yards to my left. Now, 50 yards to my right is my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, okay? They're good people. They are my father-in-law, Roger, worked for Chrysler Motors for 30 years, and he is a man of few words. He is a guy that is going to be very thoughtful when you speak to him. He likes tractors. He likes old cars. He likes Mopar vehicles and going to car shows and the typical early 70s country folks from North Alabama, okay? Here's where the story goes off the tracks. To my left, I thought that I had the largest manufacturer of methamphetamines in the state of Alabama and possibly the Southeast, living 50 to 75 yards to my left. So this guy and his wife buy this little ranch-style Meemaw Pawpaw house that looks just like mine, probably built by the same guy. And they buy it 2.5 years ago. There's stuff all in the yard. And from the day they bought the house, they never lived in the house. They live in a travel camper in the garage, and they've never lived in the house. People coming in and out all the time. So finally, after 2.5 years, I thought, well, they're obviously manufacturing methamphetamines out of that house. And if the wind's blowing my direction, I'm going to be smelling methamphetamine smoke, and I know that's not good for you. So what does Scott do? He calls one of his buddies that he was served with in the Marine Corps, who is the head of a SWAT team of a major city here in the United States of America. And I said, hey, listen, I got the largest methamphetamine manufacturer since Breaking Bad living 50 yards from my house. I'm going to send you some pictures. I need you to call the Morgan County Drug Task Force and let them know that they need to come over here and raid this house. He takes my pictures. He calls the Morgan County Drug Task Force. He talks to them about what I've seen. Now, my wife's been very careful. She doesn't want her name mentioned. Don't say it's the neighbors. You know, wants all this on the DL. So he calls. He's the head of a major U.S. cities SWAT team. He has breached probably over 1,000 doors of methamphetamine houses throughout the city that he's the commander of over, and I'm not going to tell you which city it is because I don't want to divulge that. But come to find out, Bradley, I owe my neighbor an apology, a public apology, and I want to do it today here on the Insurance Guys podcast. My neighbor,
I know where this is going.
My neighbor is not the largest distributor of methamphetamines, possibly in the southeastern United States of America. He is not that, and I need to publicly apologize. And when I'm wrong, Bradley, I think you'll admit, when I'm wrong, I will call you, I will look you dead in your face, and I will say, I was wrong. I apologize. I was wrong. A lot of people can't do that. My mother has never said, I'm sorry or apologized one day in her life, ever. And you probably have people in your life that are like, if they ever say they're sorry or that they apologize, you just about fall on the floor. You're like, my God, I never thought I'd hear that out of your mouth. Anyway, I want to publicly look in this camera. Rand, is this my camera right here? Okay, I want to look in this camera right here. Matt, I'm sorry. You are not the largest distributor of methamphetamines in the United States, possibly. You are running the largest fencing operation in North Alabama.
I knew that was coming.
But I want to say that I'm sorry for thinking it was methamphetamines. It was not. It was the largest fencing operation. I basically have a pawn shop 50 yards from my house. And I want to apologize, Matt, that I was so wrong about you. It was not methamphetamines, ladies and gentlemen. It was the largest fencing operation in the history of mankind since Jesus walked on earth. So, Matthew, I'm so sorry about all that, brother. It's on me, not on you. I'm sorry. Now, let's get to our guest today. I'm so excited because 2 or 3 years ago, Bradley, I cannot remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I distinctly remember on this podcast, Bradley Flowers said, whoever is the person that figures out how to do what this guy has done is going to make more money than a show dog can jump over. You remember that? You said, if somebody can ever figure out how to make insurance's own AI platform that agents use, that even carriers start using, they are going to have their own private island in the Bahamas. And I cannot wait for him to have that island and to send me my T-shirt. And I've got one tomorrow, my very first T-shirt I get to wear tomorrow.
Okay.
I made millions of dollars off my company, and all Scott got was this shitty T-shirt.
There you go.
I have the very first one of those I get to wear on a podcast tomorrow. And I'm probably more excited about that than if I'd made $1 million off of it. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, he was born, raised, and lives in Miami, Florida. He grew up on a small farm there in Miami, which I will agree with him. When I think of Miami, I do not think about farming. I think about Pine Ridge, Alabama when I think about farming. He and I have a very similar background in that when he was, I'm going to say, college age, and when I was college aged, we both had the same occupation. He did it at Nordstrom. I did it at Yielding's department store. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody want to take a guess as to what that was? Selling women's shoes.
Wait, you sold ladies' shoes?
I did. We're going to get into that today. Don't you think we're not getting into that today? He has he's gotten his PNC license. He's also, this is the craziest thing I think I've ever heard. From 2016 to 2018, while he was in college, he came up with this idea, and I can't believe Bradley Flowers hadn't already come up with this idea, because this sounds like the most Bradley Flowers idea I've ever heard. While he was in college, sitting in his dorm room, playing Xbox or PlayStation, he came up with the idea of how to allow 18-year-olds to rent their vehicle from another 18-year-old. And after being rejected by 47 carriers, that's 47 carriers, he had his program for this particular car rental business mobile app underwritten by Prime. That was the program. And so he became a customer of Prime and came up with the app to allow college-age kids to be able to rent cars from one another. That is the most brilliant idea I think I've ever heard. Today, he is the CEO and founder of Gail. Gail is the insurance and financial services' very own insurance AI tool. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor today to introduce to you first-time guest and new sponsor of the Insurance Guys podcast, Mr. Matthew Vega-Sanz. How are you, Matthew?
Good, man. Thanks for having me. I think also important clarification. I'm not the guy with the fencing company, even though we have the same name and
That's
my
true.
farm background. Even though my farm background might make some think I'm the fencing guy. I'm
We're
not.
bringing him on the podcast to apologize.
Hey, Matthew, trust me when I say they 1,000% know that you are not that guy. They know that the guy I'm talking about is in Pine Ridge, Alabama, and used his house as a pawn shop, basically. But hey, I just want to say what an honor and pleasure it is to have you on the podcast today. Kind of go back in time for me. First of all, let's stop right there. Let's you and I just have a moment. Nobody's going to hear this. It's just you and I. And I'm lying. Everybody's going to hear this. Women's shoes. Let's just talk shop for a minute because we're both pros in this field, okay? I sold women's shoes when I was 21 at Yielding's department store, Birmingham, Alabama, Brookwood Mall. Did it for about a year. You, too, are an expert in women's shoes, Nordstrom department store. Tell me your experience. Let's swap some war stories here.
And it was funny because my freshman year of college, I was originally going to be playing basketball down in Miami. I got into a bad dirt bike accident, destroyed my foot. And so the moment I told the coaches that I was no longer going to be able to play my freshman year, I basically lost all my opportunities to play. When you're 5'9", 150 on a good day, you rely on your athleticism a little bit. So as soon as they lost that athleticism, like, oh, that actually works out. There's another guy we want to recruit in your spot. So I basically lost my spot on the team a week before practice started. And at that point, I kind of had the moment of, all right, I'm not going to go to the NBA or even play pro overseas. So I got to do plan 2, which is to try to make something of myself academically and then try to transfer out to a better business school. And so that's what I started doing. So in order to pay for my bills, I needed to work. I needed to find a way to pay for my SAT classes so I could improve my SAT score. And one of my buddies had just started working over at Nordstrom, and he was making what was good money for 19, 20-year-olds. And so I applied. I didn't get in. They told me you're going to call me back the next day. It's been like 10 years. They still haven't called me back. And so I applied for one of the other Nordstroms in Miami. Both my brother and I applied to that one. He got the job. I didn't, selling men's in the men's department. And they called me back like 3 days later and were like, hey, there's an opening in women's shoes. You want to do that? And I was like, yeah, sure. It was an experience. I have way more respect now for people that work retail. I think the toughest part about working at Nordstrom was they had a return anything policy.
Oh boy.
And so you'd have a Friday where you just thought you were crushing the sales. You thought you're like the sales lord. You'd sell $10,000, they'd get 10% of that. And then Monday morning I'd come in and the people had returned everything and I would have lost out on my commission. And so it was, I guess you can almost say it was a great way to start learning how to underwrite because I started being able to pick out who I thought was going to be the professional renters and who wasn't. And so if I saw a young guy that was spending egregious amounts of money and he came to the wrong department, like didn't even care who was servicing him, just wanted to buy a bunch of Ferragamo, I knew that was probably not the best person to go with. But if it was an older woman, if it was an older woman and she was by herself or with her daughter, I knew they were probably going to spend a decent amount of time. So I would run up to them the moment they walked through the doors. And so I guess you can say that's how my underwriting background started.
That's interesting. Did you have the same philosophy?
No, I didn't. We didn't sell the high end shoes like he's talking about, the Ferragamo stuff.
You worked at Payless?
No, somewhere in between. Yielding's department store, I would compare it to like a Belk department store, like that kind of place, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say my biggest bugaboo about working women's shoes, and I was really good at it because you know me, I can turn it on when I want to turn it on.
I bet you got some dates from that.
I don't remember. It's been a long time ago. I was his age. I was probably 21, 20, 22, somewhere in that range. But one of the things I do remember distinctly about that particular job was a lot of women would come in and they'd say, you know, can I try this on in an 8? Well, absolutely. Yeah, let me go get you that 8. And I'd bring it back and that 8 ain't fitting on their foot. it was that thing where they think they wear like a size, especially like women that maybe are a little overweight. They would be like, you know what, y'all wear an 8.5, and really they wore like a 9.5. So
Dude,
you'd have to walk back and forth like 3 times to get them the right size.
I'll tell you, man, this has nothing to do with insurance. So I wore a medium T-shirt through middle school, high school, and college.
Mm-hmm.
My mom still thinks I wear a medium. And every year at Christmas, I get 2 or 3 polo shirts that are mediums that I cannot fit. I'm like, Mom, I do not wear a medium anymore.
And she just can't figure it out.
Still buying me mediums.
Hey, Matthew.
I was gonna say one of the things that threw me off was how many people have different size feet.
Yeah.
That was like one of the big surprises from my time working there.
Yeah, it's very like we tend to, oh yeah, I'm an 8, but you may not be an 8. You know what I mean? But it's like that's the one that just happens to fit the best or something like that.
No, I meant like how many people have like their left foot is a
Oh,
size 7,
yeah,
their right
yeah.
foot's a size 8.
Yes.
Like we had a whole section in the back for people like that.
That's crazy.
Absolutely.
And it'll change by brand too.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You know,
it does.
like in Nikes, I'm an 11, but in another brand, I might be a 10.
Yeah.
Hey, Matthew, I've got the next question I've got for you. We're going to move off that for a minute. So you're in your dorm room with your boys. Y'all are hanging out. Now, everyone on this podcast, listeners and Bradley and I included, know that when you go to rent a car, they are very strict on the fact that you have to be, I believe it's 24 years old or older, and some are 25.
25, yeah.
And so as an 18, 19, 20-year-old, you ain't renting a car, Bubba. That ain't happening. How on earth did you come up with this idea, which is, by the way, brilliant, that you were going to create an app that would allow 18, 19, 20-year-olds to rent cars to each other?
Yeah, so my brother and I went to a small school after we transferred out of Miami, my brother and I went to a small school called Babson College in the small town Wellesley, Massachusetts. It's like 15 miles outside of Boston. And around that time, Uber and Lyft were starting to become popular, but they hadn't necessarily gotten a big presence in these small towns around Massachusetts. And so one night we wanted Papa John's pizza. They wouldn't deliver. And so my brother we end up getting from a local shop that wasn't really that great. When my brother goes outside to grab the pizza, he saw the parking lot packed to capacity. And he thought, oh man, it'd be really cool if we could rent another student's car and go pick up the pizza. And this was, again, really when all the shared economy stuff was popping up. So like Airbnb for X or Uber for Y. So that was fresh on every 20-year-old's mind because that's what you'd see on the internet.
Yeah.
And so that was when we had the idea. And then we didn't necessarily think too much of it. We applied to a business competition at Babson. And then like 2 months later, we ended up finding out we got in, which was funny because we had forgotten about the idea and we had already put together internships for that summer. But when we ended up going to the event, we ended up getting like dead last because all the parents hated the idea. All the professors and judges hated the idea, but all the students loved it because all the students were the ones that felt the pain. So my brother and I were like, oh, let's try to pursue this for an idea. And we had one family friend I think everybody has one family friend that does insurance and everybody relies on for that person. And so we had that one person in Miami. And so we reached out to him and he just kept saying, oh, this is a surplus lines product. It's a surplus lines product, surplus lines product. But it wasn't his specialty. So he recommended we speak to some people and nobody would really take a chance on it. I kept hearing words like Lloyd. They kept hearing a bunch of words. And I heard about this one guy that had, I think, underwritten Evel Knievel back in the 80s. And so I was like, oh, if this dude's doing Evel Knievel jumps, I have to talk with that guy. And so over the course of like 2
equally
years,
as dangerous as college students sharing cars, by the way.
Yeah, maybe more dangerous. But anyways, as we started meeting with all these different insurance carriers over 2 years, I think a lot of them were just taking a meeting because they felt bad that this kid was messaging them 6 times in a row without a response. And every once in a while, we'd have like the agent that would try to step in and put like, hey, I know these guys, they're good, they're worth meeting. So we were able to get a handful of meetings, and in those conversations, I was able to start picking up a couple trends. Like they wanted everybody to have background checks. They wanted to make sure to know what types of vehicles we were getting, what type of background checks we were doing, like criminal history, sex offender, a bunch of other types. And so we started off saying, all right, it's going to be 18-year-olds from select number of schools. They have to have a .edu email. Then it was, all right, we're going to focus on particular cities. So like NYU is probably not that great of a city because it was at that time Uber's #1 city for fraud and claims. But if you're in Gainesville, Florida, where the average round trip's going to be 4 miles and the risk exposure is way less, like that was a great school for us to target. And so we started getting a little bit smarter as to what schools we would go to. Then it was also around the time where telematics was becoming a big thing, or tracking on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So you could track people's behaviors and all of that using the app, or if they want to have a telematic. So all I have to say, over 2 years, we had put together a pretty robust program of like super select students or super select universities that this was going to be available on. And so we ended up getting Prime to be the carrier on it. And then we launched September 1st, 2018. And it was really funny because the only guidance Prime gave us to report all the background checks, all the new users, all the policies for every rental, all the stuff for claims was a 6-column Excel sheet that had to be manually filed on the last day of every month and then sent to them. And so we ended up launching this app September 1st, 2018. And within a week, we ended up becoming a top 100 app on the App Store. And the reason it goes viral was, one, 18-year-olds renting cars from other 18-year-olds was great. You could literally rent a car out for $5 an hour or $25 a day. And so from a cost perspective, from a bunch of things, it went viral. But we had also gotten featured on a couple pages. They weren't like Barstool Sports, but they were the equivalent of Barstool Sports in like certain regions of the country with big followings, high engagement. And so they shared about us and it went viral. And it particularly went viral on state schools, which is where we were targeting. And so we ended up starting with Prime. As time went on, the program would end up performing well enough to where we had a couple of groups from Lloyd's overseas that wanted to pay attention to it. But that was basically how we started it. It took about 2 years about just crafting the narrative and putting together some pretty tight underwriting, putting together some pretty tight restrictions as to what schools we were going to get started on, how we were going to track people using the app and all of that. And then even little things like you couldn't download the app and try to do a rental in the next 5 minutes. You had to at least rent a car 24 hours in advance, as we noticed. That means you wouldn't be rushed. You'd probably be taking your time a bit more. We put restrictions like, hey, you couldn't rent at 11 o'clock at night on a Friday or Saturday night.
Sure.
And so we put a bunch of restrictions in place like that, and the insurance carriers ended up wanting to take the bite. But it was like a 2-year process to do it.
So how did that lead you into Gail and what you guys are doing now?
So that business, like I mentioned, when we first started in September 2018, I was still technically a student. I was technically a leave of absence, but I was still technically a student. So I had to think about, hey, what's it going to look like if we go back to school and I have to take classes? How am I going to manage all this? So my brother and I started automating all the insurance software for that app, how to do all the background checks, how to do all the reporting, how to do all the policy admin, how to do all the claims. And so we had automated all of that. And so when COVID shuts down college campuses, it basically shuts down that business.
Mm-hmm.
And so my brother and I in 2020 are trying to figure out what we're going to do with our life. We're 2 college dropouts, making $2,800 in the bank account, had to move back to Miami in with our parents. And while we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with our life, there was an investor that we had tried to pitch on investing in the business. He was a big hotshot guy in the world of auto. And he ultimately ended up passing on the idea. But in mid-2020, he reaches out to us and he says, hey, I'm trying to run, I'm now working as a contractor for the U.S. military who's trying to launch a car sharing program on military bases in Germany and the United States. The insurance carriers are telling them all they need to run background checks, organize your policies, and manage your claims a specific way. I've told them you have the technology to do all of that. Are you open for a conversation? So my brother and I very naively get on call with these guys, and we're just giving them the full playbook. Hey, this is how you're going to want to run the background checks. This is how you're going to do all the claims. This is how you're going to do all the policy admin. We're not even thinking of getting money. And at the end of it, one of the guys is like, oh, this sounds like a lot of work. How much would you guys charge if we just let you guys do it, or we just white label your tools? I was ready to say like $10,000 because I was a tech guy, so I knew it was going to take that much work. My brother on the other side is like, oh, $250. And I hit him and he's like, a year. And the guy, I remember I looked at him, I was like, you motherfucker, you just cost us the deal. And at that point, we were broke. So we were trying, like, I wanted to find a way to move out of my parents' house. And the guy on the other side of the line is like, oh, if that's it, if there were anything less, I'd be concerned. When can we get started?
You're like, oh, no,
And
no, no.
that,
250 every 6
yeah,
months.
yeah. I found out later on we could have bid like $3 million and still been by far the lowest.
Right.
But anyways, when we get that opportunity, we're like, oh man, I wonder how many other businesses need these insurance management tools, where instead of like, and we start realizing that the car rental companies, the trucking companies, a lot of the shared economy companies, they were oftentimes using 20 plus vendors to run all their background checks, their policy management, their claims. And so we had the idea of, oh man, what if we consolidate all of that into one single platform, or if we make it accessible through one API? And so we started that business at the end of 2020. That business was called Lula, and it kind of put my brother and I on the map. And we grew that to be like one of the bigger insurtechs in the country. Grew it to about 5,200 commercial customers, or B2B commercial customers. Grew it to about $60 million in funding from some really great groups like Founders Fund, Coastal, SoftBank, and all of that. And then we sold the business last year. One of the things that happens as we're growing that business is, in our second big round of funding, we did a $35 million round of funding led by Coastal Ventures. And Coastal Ventures has a lot of claim to fame, but one of their claims to fame is they were the first institutional capital in OpenAI 10 years ago.
Okay.
And so when we're going through our Series B process for Lula, they basically tell us, hey, we want to lead your round, but it's almost contingent on you guys opening up a subsidiary that's going to be an AI for insurance division. They're like, you guys, at that point, we were probably the #1 highest flying insurtech in the country. And so they're like, hey, if somebody's going to bring AI to the world of insurance, we think it's going to be you guys, and it's going to be a generational opportunity. We'll fund it, but you have to go out and get your VP of AI and build this division. And their whole premise was, if you look at the 1980s with like the data terminals, Michael Bloomberg did not build data terminals, or he didn't create them. Right. He took data terminals and configured them for the world of financial services and just did a really good job. You look at what Dan Gilbert did with mortgages online. Dan Gilbert in the 1990s was the first one to build, essentially configure the internet for mortgages. And so the guys from Coastal had a very similar thing. OpenAI and Claude and those guys are building incredible AI for the very generic, general world. Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to build AI that's compliant, that's trained for the world of insurance, and that should be you guys. You can almost think about it as they wanted us to build the OpenAI for insurance. And so my brother and I started working on that idea 2 years ago. And then the whole premise there was, if you look at the insurance industry as a whole, about 35 to 40% of insurance revenues goes towards really three things: sales support and loss adjustment expense. A lot of the LAE is going towards the people side of things. And so we thought, hey, the insurance world does not necessarily need another underwriting tool. If you look at it just from a P&L perspective, insurance carriers spend about 3.5% of their revenue on IT. They spend less than 1% of their revenue on underwriting. Really, what technology am I going to find, or what variables am I going to find as an outsider that you haven't found the last 50 years? It's going to make a significant impact quarter over quarter on the underwriting side. Probably not that many. And if I do find something, it's going to take time for the regulators to approve it. So we started saying, all right, if we build this all-powerful, knowledgeable insurance AI, what are the three areas we could tackle? Sales support and LAE. And we started thinking, how can we do that with really one rendition to start off with? It was voice. And so we started saying, hey, if we can build an AI that speaks like a human on text, email, voice, and chat, and is also able to help with sales support and just basic claims management, it almost becomes fiscally irresponsible for insurance carriers and agents to at least not consider using your product. Right. And so in 2023, we started developing that under the radar. And that was what our entire premise was for the business, that we're going to build this open AI for insurance. And then towards the end of 2023, 2024, we publicly mentioned for the first time, like, hey, we're going to be releasing this in a couple of months. We'll start taking pre-orders. And within a couple of months, we got almost $10 million in pre-orders. And like Lula had grown fast. Lula had gone from like 1 to 50 mil in ARR in about 18 months. And we were accustomed to fast growth. when we saw all the stuff that was happening with the AI side, we were like, oh, we had like a holy shit moment. Like, it might be time to bet the house on this thing. And so in 2024, we had a couple of opportunities to sell the Lula business and keep the Gale component of the business. And so my brother and I kind of had a moment. We're like, oh man, it might be right now time to go all in on this thing. And so we ended up selling the Lula business, and we finished the transaction in Q4 of last year. And so my brother and I guess the Gale team have been full time on this now for the last 6 months. But that's kind of how we got started into this whole thing, was we wanted to build domain specific AI. And then what ended up happening is last year, when we publicly started to mention Gale, we started getting contacted by a lot of banks and financial institutions saying, hey, the guardrails you're building to power this thing for insurance, same ones we need as a bank. The way you're training this thing, very similar to what we need from a bank. From a compliance perspective, same thing we need. That's why now you saw us open it up a little bit when we made the big public announcement of Gale like 2 weeks ago. We now started talking about AI for financial services, whether it's banking, finance, or insurance. That said, our bread and butter is insurance. That's where we've been for like the last almost 10 years, my brother and I. But that's kind of how we got into this whole thing. We started one business called Lula Rides, with that car sharing app. Then we got into Lula, and then Lula ultimately ended up opening the door up for Gale. But that's kind of how everything happened and came together.
Well, and one thing I love about Gale is, to me, there's two types of insurtechs. There are insurtechs that people from outside the industry see a perceived problem and try to solve it. But to me, the better version of those is someone like yourself that, hey, I'm in this business, I see this problem, so I'm going to create this software to help me run my business more efficiently. And oh, by the way, other people can use this too. And I think there's a lot of noise out there right now, Matthew, around AI and AI for insurance. I mean, I guarantee you, if I go to my email right now, there's going to be like 15 emails from AI companies that are just, wrappers on top of Chat GPT and that sort of thing. And you guys are truly building this as an AI solution for the insurance industry. It's not some fly-by-night thing that somebody's just trying to make a buck to take advantage of insurance agents.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, one of the things that, if you guys ever meet, I've met Bradley in person, Scott. If you ever meet me in person, you notice I'm not the biggest guy. So for me to have had the chances to play college basketball at the places that I had the chance to play at, the only way you do that is by getting really good at listening to feedback and implementing that feedback. And I remember when we were first getting into this stuff in 2020 and early 2021, I saw all the comments about Lemonade and stuff like that from guys like Bradley. I got the comments from guys like Rick Lindsay that were almost just shitting on. Sorry, can I curse on this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Scott Howell hosts the show. You definitely can.
Yeah, that they were just shitting on these insurtechs, and you have two ways to respond to that. It's like, all right, get super pissed off and say, fuck these guys, or try to take the feedback to see why is it that these guys are anti-insurtechs.
Right.
And then you start to get into it, and you're like, they're not anti-insurtech. They're anti the outsiders coming in and saying, you guys are all idiots. We're going to teach you how it's done and all this different stuff. And so that was very much how my brother and I approached it. That's why when I eventually got my license, because I was like, even if I don't ever plan on starting a carrier or an agency or anything like that, I want to know why things are done a certain way. I kind of also want to pay my respects to the industry, to say, hey, like I went through somewhat what you guys went through in terms of getting licensed and stuff to learn the industry, and also just learn the terminology. I think that helped us quite a bit. And so when we're like, one of the things I do now, oftentimes I'll read the Federal Insurance Office's annual report. And because of my training when I took the insurance courses, I was now able to take a look back and see, like, hey, why is it that even though the industry's increased in revenue over 2x the last decade, why was net income for the industry in 2023 60% of what it was a decade before? Why is it that LAE has only dropped a couple bips, even though we've invested $50 billion in insurance over the last decade? And so a lot of that approach that we've taken and wanting to actually study that stuff has been because we saw the comments from guys like Bradley, and we wanted to see like, hey, what's leading to all of this? And I think